I bet a lot of us have this folder, like tucked away somewhere, just full of ideas we never pursue.
Oh, yeah.
It could be like a business plan or a creative project or some audacious goal we just, chickened out on.
Right.
Well, today's deep dive is for those folders.
I love it.
We are diving into a whole stack of articles and research, and it's all about reframing failure,
Okay.
how to turn those what ifs into like fuel for actually moving forward.
So it's interesting because these sources, they go beyond the usual, like, failure is good kind of pep talk.
Yeah.
They actually break down the mechanics of how successful people actually use their setbacks.
So less Russia and more like a practical toolkit for turning stumbles into strategy.
Exactly. Like, take the classic Thomas Edison light bulb story.
Right, we've all heard it.
Yeah, we've all heard about the 1,000 plus attempts, but one source really dug into, like, Edison's process.
Oh,
He
interesting.
didn't just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
Each failure led him to refine his materials, his methods.
Mm.
He was actually documenting the why things didn't work,
Huh.
turning those 1,000 no's into data points.
That's way more insightful than just, he never gave up. It's like instead of a failure journal, we should be keeping a failure lab notebook.
I like that.
Yeah.
It really shifts the perspective.
Totally.
And this ties into another point a few sources made, which is that, like, fear of judgment, hurdle.
Yeah.
They argue that a lot of it comes from assuming failure means we're flawed
Right.
versus the experiment just needing tweaking.
Oh, I see. But
Yeah.
the what will people think thing is so real. It's
Oh,
like
right.
totally almost instinctual.
Of course, and the sources acknowledge that.
Okay.
But they offer this counterpoint. Most people are too caught up in their own experiments
Right.
to be meticulously tracking yours.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, and plus think about J.K. Rowling getting 12 rejections for Harry Potter.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine the judgment she must have faced?
And thank goodness she ignored it.
Right.
It makes you wonder how many brilliant ideas are gathering dust because of that fear.
Totally.
So practically speaking, how do we shift away from that feeling of failure as a personal attack?
So several sources pointed to the growth mindset.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
But again, they go deeper than just the label.
Okay.
They break it down into two key actions.
Okay.
First, consciously separating yourself from the outcome.
Hmm.
So the experiment failed, not you.
Okay, so that's mental. Step 1, detach the ego. What's the second action?
Shifting the focus from talent to process.
Okay.
These sources emphasize that even people we consider geniuses like Michael Jordan
Oh, yeah.
relied heavily on process.
Mm-hmm.
Remember he got cut from his high school basketball team?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Imagine if he'd internalized that as like, I'm not talented enough.
Right. Instead, he turned it into a practice regimen that's legendary.
Exactly.
Suddenly, growth mindset feels less fluffy and more like a training schedule.
Exactly. And a lot of the sources connected this directly to resilience, which is where we'll pick up next.
Okay, so we're building this like mental toolkit, right?
Yeah.
Failure lab notebook, separating ego from outcome, focusing on process over talent.
Right.
So it sounds like resilience is like the heavy-duty wrench in this set.
It's definitely key, and the sources highlight how resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about bouncing back better. They use the example of Elon Musk and those early SpaceX launches.
Oh, right.
Remember all the explosions?
Yeah, those were hard to watch. Like, it felt like every other launch was ending in a fireball.
Exactly. But what's crucial is how Musk and his team responded.
Yeah.
They didn't just shrug it off, you know?
Right.
They forensically analyzed each failure.
Oh, wow.
One source called it embracing the iterative loop. Each explosion kind of refined their understanding,
Yeah.
leading to the incredible success they have now.
So it's not just persistence, it's persistent learning.
Right.
You almost have to become like a failure detective.
Yeah.
Figuring out the clues each setback leaves behind.
That's a great way to put it. And this detective work is especially important when it comes to risk-taking. You know, the sources are clear success requires some level of risk,
Yeah.
but they emphasize the difference between, like, reckless leaps
Oh, yeah.
and calculated risks.
So how do we tell the difference? Like, when is it go big or go home versus knowing when to fold them?
The sources define smart risk as having a plan even amidst uncertainty.
Okay.
They use the example of Jeff Bezos leaving a stable job to start Amazon.
Right. Huge risk.
Massive risk,
Yeah.
right? But he had researched, like, the emerging e-commerce landscape, identified a gap, and had a strategy.
So he didn't just jump off a cliff hoping for the best.
Right.
He had a parachute, a flight plan, and backup supplies, even though the terrain was totally uncharted.
Precisely. And this leads to a really interesting point several sources brought up. Learning from the failures of others.
Oh, yeah.
Almost like you're crowdsourcing your risk assessment.
Why reinvent the wheel or crash and burn on the same mistakes?
Right.
When we can learn from those who have gone before us.
Exactly. Whether it's biographies of successful people or business case studies or even just conversations with mentors.
Right.
There's a wealth of knowledge out there about what works, what doesn't, and why.
Yeah.
It's like having a guidebook to help navigate that risky terrain.
But wouldn't that make success too predictable? Like, part of the thrill is the unknown, right?
That's where the sources get really philosophical.
Okay.
They challenge that traditional definition of success as this, like, singular point we reach.
I see.
Instead, they talk about it as like a continuous process.
Okay.
A journey shaped by both triumphs and setbacks.
So less about reaching the mountaintop.
Yeah.
And more about the skills we develop while out there.
Exactly. And this is where they bring up a pretty mind-blowing example.
Okay.
Walt Disney being fired from a newspaper for lacking creativity.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine?
The guy who built an empire on imagination?
Yeah.
Wow, that really shows that early failures don't define our potential.
Exactly. And this kind of feeds back into our earlier points about growth mindset and resilience. Disney didn't let that experience crush him. He used it as fuel.
Right.
He redefined what success meant for him.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the detours and the unexpected turns lead us to, like, the most incredible destinations.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into embracing failure,
Yeah.
it feels like we've gone way beyond those typical motivational slogans, you know?
Right.
It's more about, like, building a framework for analyzing setbacks.
Right.
Almost like turning failure into a strategic advantage.
And what's so fascinating is that these sources, they came from such diverse fields,
Yeah.
business psychology, even history.
Uh-huh.
But they all converged on this idea that the ability to learn from failure is a key predictor of long-term success.
It's like that saying, experience is a hard teacher, but fools learn from no other.
Yeah.
But except in this case, we're not just learning, we're becoming like failure forensic scientists.
I love that.
We're like examining the evidence to improve our next move.
I love that analogy, and it highlights a really subtle but important point.
What's that?
This isn't about celebrating failure for its own sake.
Oh, okay.
It's about recognizing that failure is inevitable, but how we respond to it is a choice.
Right. It's not about seeking out failure.
Right.
It's about having the tools to extract value from it when it inevitably happens.
Exactly.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so powerful. It's
Yeah.
not just like feel-good inspiration, it's actionable advice.
Absolutely. And if there's one takeaway I hope listeners walk away with, it's this.
Okay.
Redefine what success means to you. It's not about avoiding failure. It's about embracing the journey with all its twists and turns,
Right.
knowing that each step, even the missteps, contribute to our growth.
It's like we're not just climbing the mountain, we're mapping the territory,
Yeah.
building resilience with each climb.
Exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, those unexpected detours lead us to, like, even more incredible views
Totally.
than we could have planned for.
So as a final thought, I would challenge you to ask yourself,
Okay.
what's one small calculated risk you can take today?
Hmm.
Something outside your comfort zone, knowing that even if it doesn't go perfectly,
Right.
it's data for your failure lab notebook,
Yeah.
a step toward mastering the art of failing forward.
That's a great challenge to leave our listeners with. So go out there, experiment, analyze, iterate,
Yeah.
and most importantly, keep learning and growing from every experience, both the successes and the so-called failures.
That's it.
Until next time, keep diving.